Welcome to Landskrona Foto Festival and this first seminar that we're having here today. My name is Lars Mogensen. I'm a radio journalist, and I've been asked to, if necessary, try to moderate the discussions that we're having here today. Can you hear me good?
Yeah.
I wonder how many of you have taken a picture with your cell phone this morning? Several. How many of you did take a picture with your cell phone yesterday? Basically everyone. It's amazing how we keep taking pictures of everything. The food right in front of us, the people next to us, things we see. I wanted to show this picture. It's a schoolboy. He's about 10 years old. He's growing up in a very poor family with a single mother. Today he's evidently been to school. He's wearing a school cap and he's been to the photographer. And he seems very proud and happy. And I'm sure that his mother was even more proud of him being a well-educated school guy. Going to the photographer in this era, this was late 1930s, early 1940s, was of course a very special occasion. Whereas, as a contrast of today, taking a picture is nothing. We do it all the time. And so there are millions of questions you can put connected to this. How do we understand photography? How do we understand pictures? How do we understand the world through pictures? This was my dad back in 1939, 1940 something. That was a different era. So the question is there an inflation today in photography? What are photography photos worth to us today? How do the speed in society affect our memory and our understanding of photography and the world? French philosopher Paul Virilio is talking about how speed is the driving force in society. And speed is clearly something that is very important in photography, right? We are having 3 presentations here today with different angles. 2 of them are connected to one of the main exhibitions here in Landskrona, which is The Great Terror. It's an exhibition at the Citadel that I warmly recommend, Citadel. It deals with the terror and the mass murders during the Stalin era in Soviet Union in the 1930s. It's been done by Tomasz Kisny, who's a Polish photographer and a writer, closely working together with Dominique Roinet, who's a graphic designer. They've been working for many years. Thomas has been traveling through former Soviet Union, taking pictures of mass graves, interviewing eyewitnesses, going through archives. It's a long, long job. And Dominique will be speaking about documentary photo, the selections we make, the choices we make, questions concerning credibility, etc. But we're starting off with Fred Ritchin, who's he's a photographer, he's a writer, he's written several books on photography, like After Photography from 2008, Bending the Frame, his name is his latest book. Back in the 80s, he was picture editor at New York Times Sunday Magazine. He's the dean of the International Center of Photography in New York. So he's teaching students from all over the world. And the name of Fred's presentation is Memory and Media in a Digital Age. And there will be plenty of time for you to raise questions, ask questions. Just raise your hand. And at the end of every presentation, we'll have plenty of time for comments. And I hope you would like to interact. So please welcome Fred Ritchin.
Hi, I'm wearing an interesting headset, so I'm allowed to walk around. Just a few things at the beginning to say, I'm not sure that what we call digital photography is the same as photography. The book I wrote, After Photography, argues the case that it's not. It's a new medium. We don't really know what it is yet. It's kind of like the horseless carriage. When we invented the automobile, we didn't know what to call it, so we just said it doesn't have a horse. And then eventually we figured out it's something different, but we still have horsepower in our engines. We're having trouble figuring out what they can do. To me, digital photography is a code-based medium, based on code, zeros and ones, pixels. Very much like our DNA, our cells is based on code. And so to me, it's not an accident that we invented a new medium based on code at the same time that we reconceptualized ourselves as people based on code. Another argument, and I'll just make 2 or 3 at the beginning, the more theoretical, and then show you lots of images, is that to me, analog photography is defined as continuous tone, just like sound. Analog sound is continuous tone, and it comes from a Newtonian universe, Isaac Newton, of cause and effect. And to me, the digital media in general is quantum. It's all based on discrete segments, pixels. It's all chopped up that way. So that there are 2 very different worldviews. One is Newtonian, cause and effect. The other is quantum, discrete segments that act in probabilistic ways, in different ways than in Newtonian. It's not cause and effect. And I think as you start to look at Twitter, which chops up language into 140 characters, it's much more discrete segments. There's not cause and effect. We have Donald Trump as a result. It's a very different universe from the universe of cause and effect, of reason. So I'm a big admirer of digital possibility, which I'll show you. There's also dangers in every change, but we're doing a very good job of denying that we're in the middle of a revolution by saying that we're using web pages and mouses and apples and so on. We kind of camouflage it as the same old thing, the horseless carriage idea. Is that clear? You're supposed to say yes. Thank you. So let me show you some ideas, and I'll try to do this. So this is Hippolyte Bayard in 1841. He and Daguerre both invented photography, and this is him drowned. He wasn't drowned, he showed himself drowned because he was so upset that the French government preferred Daguerre's idea to his idea. So there's been fakery in photography since its beginning, in the 19th century. What's different now is the scale of it, the frequency of it. When something is put on a screen, it's in pixels, it's already chopped up, it's already ready for reassemblage. It's much more like collage than the old photograph, the analog photograph used to be. So we do it more often. It's also kind of dialectical. Because we do it more often, we simulate, we make up, we fabricate much more. Because we fabricate much more, we then reassemble much more. Photoshop and the like. To me, this is the image I used at the beginning of the After Photography book, Loretta Lux. This is the digital environment. Everything is possible. You can photograph, using the word photograph in quotations, your dreams, the future. It's a kind of a different universe in which it's not just what John Berger referred to as a quotation from appearances. To me, analog photography, particularly in the documentary sort, is a quotation from appearances. What's in the rectangle is like a quotation, you can't change it, there it is. It's a footprint, is what Sontag said. In the digital realm, those things don't really count the same way. Simultaneously, we use photograph to prove something is real when it's completely unreal. This is our former president, where I come from, a year after the invasion of Iraq, saying mission accomplished, when in fact it's evident to everybody the mission was never accomplished. So the photograph, because it has this link to truth, we use it to prove things that shouldn't be proved. We just accept them as true. This is, to me, the family album of the future. This is Pedro Mayer, the Mexican photographer on the left with his son. This is Pedro Mayer, the future Mexican photographer on the right with his father. Do you understand? Pedro Mayer is twice in the image. The little guy on the right is Pedro Mayer with his father. The big guy on the left is Pedro Mayer with his son. You get it? So this is the family album of the future in a quantum universe where you can go backwards and forwards, where all kinds of other things are possible. You could fabricate your own history and your own future. You know, there's people who specialize in taking out ex-husbands and wives from divorce cases from family albums. You can rewrite history. It's very easy. So when we're talking about memory, what is the correct memory? How do you know what the correct memory is? How does a child today know whether the grandparents, who was actually at the wedding, with Photoshop? Yes? Have pity on me and just laugh or say yes or do something occasionally so I know we're talking to each other. So the Chicago Sun-Times, one of the oldest, most prestigious newspapers in the United States, a couple of years ago fired all their photographers in one day. I know that's happened in Sweden, it's happened in elsewhere. Somebody told me there's a newspaper in Asia that gave iPhones or cell phone cameras to pizza delivery guys because they didn't need photographers anymore. So one of the questions is, what does a professional photographer, a sophisticated photographer do that a pizza delivery guy cannot do? Is it the same medium, in fact, or are those two different media? Is there kind of pizza photography and professional photography? This is Liberation in Paris a couple of years ago, leaving out all the photographs in an issue because they took pity on photojournalists and what's happening to the field. You know, with billions of people with cameras now, the professional photojournalist is a tiny minority. The chances are much, 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 much greater that if an event of significance happens, a non-professional will be there closer by than a professional. So I'm often asked, what's the difference between a professional photographer and a non-professional photographer? And that's part of what I'll be trying to address. This is Getty Images a couple of years ago. They gave away 35 million photographs from Getty Images free. People can use them for free because they found that the metadata was more valuable than the photographs. The metadata that goes with the photographs, they know they could sell it to advertisers. They use the metadata to figure out advertising strategies and so on, whereas the photograph itself is almost meaningless at this point. There are just so many of them. I'm not trying to be cynical. I don't believe that. That's what they said. So in 1984, this is about 5 or 6 years before Photoshop, I did a piece for the New York Times Sunday magazine on the coming revolution of photography, which they came up with a terrible title for. But the idea was that the Cytex machine in those days, the digital machine, which cost $500,000, you could put photographs into pixels and then you could rearrange them. So what I showed them was a photograph of the New York City skyline. I published this in 1984. And then with the Cytex machine and the guy who operated it, we changed it. We put in the Eiffel Tower, we put in the Transamerica Pyramid. If you look at the building on the upper right, we turned the roof around, you see? I created a traffic jam near the Eiffel Tower because I thought a lot of people would go there. I put in the Statue of Liberty. And I did lots of small things like the pier on the right. I added one, or, you know, you could do, I moved the Empire State Building uptown a few blocks and made it taller because the operator thought I was idiotic for doing so few changes with all this great machinery. But the idea being that in 1984, which is now 32 years ago, I wanted to show that this is going to change radically the way we think about our own history, about our own contemporary life, because it's so easy to do. And it's so undetectable and difficult to find out. And I said we should have rules about that. You know, we should label it differently. It's like when you walk into a bookstore and you want novels, they send you to fiction. When you want history, they send you to nonfiction. But photography doesn't yet have categories of nonfiction and fiction. We don't know what nonfiction and fiction means in photography. The World Press Photo, just in Amsterdam, is coming up with a new category of nonfiction storytelling. So the language is beginning to change. But for the most part, we associate photography with the real when it should not be associated all the time with the real. You know, some photographs are much more like novels, and some more like histories, which have their own fictions as well. So this was it. It was 1.6 million copies were sold of that magazine in 1984. I got 3 letters to the editor. People really were not concerned at all about what was happening. We've had a long lead time to figure out what to do about all this. 1982, National Geographic, in my opinion, began the digital revolution in the journalistic documentary photographic field. This was a horizontal photograph of the pyramids of Giza, and they needed to put it on a vertical cover, so they rotated the pyramid on the left, behind the pyramid on the right. And when I called the editor-in-chief, he said, we didn't really do anything. All we did was go back in time and move the photographer a couple of meters to one side to get a different point of view. And I called him back, and I said, this was, 1984. I called him back. I said, did you really say that? And he said, yeah, that's all we did. And I was thinking, if National Geographic, which is probably the most conservative magazine in the United States, could say all we did was go back in time and move a photographer, we don't realize, but the revolution has already started. This is Fire on Ice. This is the first future news photograph. Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan were both Olympic ice skaters. They were going to meet the next day. This is the picture of the next day. I think it's fantastic to show the next day in photography. It'd be very helpful to do. But what they did was they composited the photograph, they say in the bottom right. But again, I asked them, did anybody complain? They said nobody complained at all. This is 1994, so this is 22 years ago. So that's the first future news photograph. This is the same year. O.J. Simpson was arrested on suspicion of a double murder. On the left, this is Newsweek. On the right, they both come from the Los Angeles Police Department mugshot photograph when he was arrested. And on the right, I think it was the editor-in-chief wrote the next week, all we did was take a common mugshot and quote, raise it to the level of art with no sacrifice to truth. So on the right, you're looking at art. On the left, you're looking at a police photograph. It was almost, it was highly condemned as being racist. When the guy is a celebrity, he's light-skinned, and when he's thought of as a criminal, he's dark-skinned. And that's something you see often in the history of imagery. This was the first news photograph that was made without either a photographer or a camera being present, which was pretty good. This is also around the same time. This was a Finnish newspaper, a Swedish airplane crash. There was no photographer present, no camera. So what they did was they montaged it using available imagery, and they did not identify it as a montage. It's just a regular press photograph. Later on, they talked to eyewitnesses to see to ask them what it looked like, and they put it together and did it. Which again, I think is pretty spectacular, but hardly known. In the United States, people used to think, it was funny, I'd say, if Monica Lewinsky only told us what she did with Bill Clinton, we could have had a photograph and stopped thinking about it. This is Time magazine. So this is not Sigmund Freud. I was disturbed to find out. This is in fact the same guy who made O.J. Simpson darker. This is Matt Mahurin. So he's the retouching guy who made O.J. Simpson darker, and this is his face in a mask. And I thought that, we all give all the credit to Cindy Sherman, but I think Time magazine is leading us in postmodernism. This is another one, Lance Corporal Boudreau. He saved my dad, he rescued my sister on the right. It's actually a horizontal photograph. Lance Corporal Boudreau killed my dad, and he knocked up, he made pregnant my sister on the left. So I called up the Department of Defense in the United States, and I asked them which one is true. because they were both on the website. In fact, there was a website with a piece of paper, and you could write in anything you want about Lance Corporal Boudreau. You know, there was whatever you want to do. And they told me that after a 1-year inquiry, they did not know. They couldn't figure it out. You get the picture?
Yes.
Okay. This is another one. When he was running for President of the United States, Kerry, the great hero of the Vietnam War, this ran as an Associated Press photograph with Jane Fonda, who people hated on the right because she was considered a left-wing communist by some people. In fact, this never happened. There's 2 separate photographs from 2 separate photographers put together. It came out something like a week before the election. It certainly didn't help John Kerry, but it's very easy to do that. You just put it, Associated Press on it. I mean, I'm still waiting for elections to change over the fake photographs. This was a good one, Oprah Winfrey. Is she the richest woman on television? It was very nice, except it was noticed that Anne Margaret, the actress, had a one-of-a-kind ring that she was wearing, Oprah Winfrey, and somebody figured out that they put her head on Anne Margaret's body. You may be the richest woman on TV, but if you don't have the right body type, she was heavier, they'll change her. I'm giving you a brief history of where we got to. This is one that makes me very sad. This is Daryl Hannah. It says at the bottom, is she going to be the next Mrs. John F. Kennedy Jr.? It looked odd to me. It turns out she's wearing exactly the same clothing that her future mother-in-law, Jackie Kennedy, wore the day that her husband was killed in Dallas, John F. Kennedy. It didn't seem right, and in fact, she wasn't wearing it. They put her head on a model and put it up there. And as you know, John F. Kennedy married someone else and died in a plane crash. And just to say, this was very early, 1990, I think, a Science magazine. This is all from the same photograph. It's very easy, and this is very primitive.